Hello everyone, welcome to another Flesh and Blood video. In this one, we're starting the deck reviews for the brand new heroes from High Seas. This first one is going to be on Marlin Treasure Hunter. The other two heroes I've been testing a little more, but I've definitely tested them most with Marlin. The deck that I think I enjoy the most from this set, although none of them are really my favorite to play compared to some of the other heroes we have. Gravy just got second place at US Nationals. However, I'm still not sure on my list to show for that. And Puffin also still needs a little bit of tinkering, but this Marlin list I think is pretty dang good and is the one that I enjoy the most from my playtime with Marlin. We have some pretty interesting choices in this deck. I think some other Marlin lists aren't on some of these, but I think they work out pretty well. And I'll be explaining those as we go along. But with that said, let's get started with the overview. Marlin Treasure Hunter is a brand new hero from High Seas. She has 40 health and 4 intellect and is a Pirate Ranger hero. She has 2 abilities, an action to tap her and destroy a gold you control, to make a goldfin harpoon in your hand. And then that is go again. And then the second effect, which is just the most important one in the deck. Whenever you draw a card during your action phase, you may put an arrow from your hand face up into your arsenal. A very powerful effect. One that you will be seeing a lot of use because her bow does not load any arrows itself. The idea of Marlin is to be playing very powerful arrows and then load them in varying ways, such as with her own ability, and then pump them up with her weapon, Hammerhead, Harpoon, Cannon. I may make a Marlin list dedicated to the more aggressive version of the deck that doesn't play Hammerhead, but that'll be for a later date. I think right now the best Marlin build is going to be with Hammerhead. I know in the first weeks before the set release, before we got all the cards, I was talking about this Go-Eyed Marlin deck, and I think there is something there. Just right now, I think the experimentations with the harpoons are a lot more interesting. Moving on to Hammerhead, Harpoon, Cannon. This is a Pirate Ranger weapon, a bow and cannon. So it's a bow, you can fire the arrows, and it's a cannon for your Go Fish effects. You can pay 4 and tap it to make your next arrow have +4, which is underrated, but still a +4 pump really isn't bad. And you give your next attack, if it's a harpoon, overpower, so you can get the hits through. That's actually really important when you consider what the harpoons actually do. And then it itself is go again. The +4 on any arrow really isn't that bad, I guess. I mean, it being under rate does hurt. Pretty much all the arrows in the deck are harpoons anyway, though. So you're still going to get the overpower. If you have to play it on something like a Remorseless or an Endless Arrow, it isn't bad. The deck's built to use Hammerhead consistently, so being able to use it is just guaranteeing that you have a pump. The rest of the equipment is really interesting because I really didn't think half of these would see much use for the hero until I actually played with them. Crown of Dominion is going to be our headpiece of choice. I've seen some people play Skullbone Cross Wrap, and I think that's a pretty interesting choice. Just I never found myself really using it. And since this list is on 6 copies of Golden Tipple, I would rather have the gold at the start of the game to start the engine going than have something like the Cross Wrap, which could help you late game once you have a ton of gold. The chest piece is going to be Trench. I actually have like Trench over something like Tunic personally, but I also see reasons why people would want to actually play Tunic. The hand is going to be the gold baited hook. This card's actually really, really good. Marlin can easily make gold every turn, so using this on an overpower arrow can guarantee you get a bonus gold, as well as with Golden Tipple, it's just free to activate, letting you generate more gold. It's a very powerful effect. We are playing the Bullseye Bracers in the sideboard for this deck for other matchups, since in the most aggressive matchups, I don't think Gold Baited Hook is that good since you won't get the value from it over a long game. But in games that are at least like 4 or 5 turns, Gold Baited Hook is going to be very powerful. And then finally, Sea Lace Sarong, the new Ranger legendary leg. Even if we don't ever activate them to give a blue arrow go again, they're still 2 block Blade Break, so they're better than the other 2 block Blade Break leg we were playing before, because we're definitely never activating those, and we might actually activate these. And then finally, Quiver of Rustling Leaves. This does mean you can technically get fatigued because we're not playing of the Abyssal, but there are times where Quiver of Rustling Leaves actually does something. I will say it is better if you are playing it with something like the Skullbone Cross Strap, the Ranger headpiece from Arcane Rising. But I just think this card is pretty good. It lets you put blue cards in your pitch zone for Conqueror if you had a extra floating resource from your trench. If you had a trench, you can't just pitch a blue to Conqueror. You need something else to pay into. So it can help with that, but also it just lets you load some arrows. If you really need to hit an arrow, it can be a lifesaver. For the main board, we have a fair amount of reds. I think it's more reds than what most Marlin decks are playing, but I think all of them definitely have a purpose. So we're just going to go left to right here, alphabetical order. Conqueror of the High Seas is a 4/7 3 block, but it's very powerful. On hit, it destroys all cards in that hero's arsenal, and we make a gold for each card destroyed this way. And if there are 2 blue cards in our pitch zone, it gets +1 and go again, making it an incredibly powerful going wide card. There are some times where I do think it's right to board it out, but those matchups are few and far between because this powerful attack just lets you go so wide and threatens so much damage on some turns. We're playing 6 copies of Golden Tipple. A lot of Marlin lists are only playing 3 of it, either 3 blue or 3 red. I think the 3 red is more common than the 3 blue, but I personally do like 6. We are playing something like another gold generator in Riches, and a lot of the other cards in the deck make gold, stuff like Sunken Treasure and Portside Exchange. So they're just a lot of value letting us have some go wide attack and then load an arrow. It's very good with the Gold Baited Hook, and since we're on the Crown of Dominion, we can easily have the gold to start if we draw one of these early. If you did only want to play 3 of these, I could see a reason to go down the blues and then go up a different blue. At that point, I would probably swap out the Crown of Dominion for the Skullbone Cross Strap, because then I think you'll get a little more value out of that. Of course, we're playing our 2 big harpoons, the King Kraken Harpoon and the King Shark Harpoon. Both of these have the mechanic Go Fish, which say when you hit a hero, they have to show you a card in their hand. Then, if it's the specific card you need them to show you, they discard it and you make a gold. But if you've used a cannon this turn, instead you look at their hand and choose the card, letting you just see more cards, letting you actually pick what you want to destroy. Certain matchups, certain ones are going to be better versus the aggressive decks. King Shark's going to be better versus the slower decks that actually play non-attack actions. King Kraken's probably going to be better. But I do think you need to play 2 of both, as they are 2 for 6 big harpoons that do a lot of damage. Very powerful with the Hammerhead. And then to round out the reds, we just have a bit of consistency and damage increasing cards. Pre-Med gives your next attack from Arsenal +3, and the next time you hit a hero with an attack, you make a Ponder. Very good with Trench, as it can be a card that if you don't need it with the Ponder, you can just recycle it to get a resource. And Take Aim as just another way to load up an arrow in case we ever need it, and it's a pump. The last red in the deck is 3 of a Kind, as this card is incredibly powerful with Marlin. It does give 3 load triggers, which we won't really care about in this deck, because we really just care about the 1. However, there are situations where we have a resource off of Trench or some other means, and we 3-oak into 2 blues and a Harpoon, and then we load the Harpoon, activate Hammerhead, and then just send a massive arrow. It's just a very good card for Marlin. since it gives you at least one reload and can give you the resource to pay for the weapon. Moving on to the yellows, there aren't too many in the deck, but I think they are pretty important. We're playing 2 Codex of Bloodrot, 3 Codex of Frailty, and a Riches of Tropal Donny. I'm just going to say this now before anyone asks. If you don't have Riches of Tropal Donny, you can just play a 3rd copy of Codex of Bloodrot instead, because Codex of Bloodrot is a little similar. Riches gives you a gold on pitch, which is, I would say, better, but you can block with Codex, and the ultimate goal of the gold token is to give you an arrow load eventually, and Codex lets you load an arrow from your hand. So they kind of do similar things. Codex of Bloodrot lets you put any card from your hand in your arsenal face down. Similar, your opponents do the same thing, but that's good since that can help you hit with some of your arrows. And you give your opponent a Bloodrot, which can help push through a little more damage, and you get a Ponder, which you don't mind because we're on the trench. You just arsenal whatever you draw. We're on 3 Codex of Frailty. There's not a replacement for this one. I really don't like doing a lot of Ranger or Assassin deck lists because this card's just at 3 in every list. I do have to do them, and I will say they are fun decks to play, but for someone trying to build on a budget, seeing these in every single list isn't really the thing you want to see. I think Codexes are down right now a fair bit, so they might not go up too much, which is a good thing if you want to get into Assassin or Ranger, but I know that they are expensive. But you do need 3 since it is such a powerful card. Finally, the blues. We already talked about Golden Tipple, but we are playing all 3 copies of the blue Harpoons, the red fin, yellow fin, and blue fin. Even though red and blue are the 2 better ones, red being better versus more aggressive decks since they play more reds, blues being better versus slower decks since they play more blues, I think there is a reason to want the Yellowfin Harpoon, as it's just another 2-for-4 Harpoon. We can load it off of a 3-oak draw and then send it for 8 with the Hammerhead and then still see our opponent's hand. I think it's still worth it to play this yellow one. I was originally testing Rusty Harpoon, but in every situation I had Rusty, I just wished it was a Yellowfin Harpoon instead. The rest of the blues are just some extra consistency cards or just some generically good Ranger cards. Infecting Shot is the highest damage blue arrow in the game, as an on hit will still have it go through for 5 since you get the Bloodrot Pox. Murderous Rabble, because half of our deck is blue, we'll get some good hits off of it. It is something that can go wide, and even if not, it's still a blue block 3, so it's still pretty good. Portside Exchange is an extra effect that lets us generate gold and draw cards, so we can use Marlin's ability to get the Harpoon, discard it to the Portside Exchange just as we do it with the Golden Tipple, draw cards so we can load an arrow, and then make our gold on the back end. Searing Shot is again just another really good blue arrow that can come in for extra damage. Sunken Treasure as a card that can add some extra graveyard disruption if needed for a matchup like Gravy Bones, or for some, Codex mirrors. And then finally, Tip the Barkeep, as Gold Kiss Rum is pretty good on turns where we can throw 2 arrows at our opponent. And it is a blue block 3 either way. If you notice, this deck was a 57 card main board, which means we're always adding at least 3 cards from our sideboard, but there are some times we are cutting some cards. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck's inventory. Starting with the equipment, Bullseye Bracers is in the deck for those situations I mentioned where we're playing against an extremely aggressive deck. Those types of decks, it's going to be pretty hard for you to actually use the hook, other than for just its 1 block. Sometimes you will generate some gold off of it, but we already have the gold off of our crown, so we shouldn't need too much. And since the game is going to go pretty fast, I think it's just better to have the +1 damage plus load from the Bullseye Bracer. It also is pretty good if we end on like a blue arsenaled arrow, because then we can fire it with the Sea Lace Sarongs with Go Again, and then use Bullseye Bracer to load the actual arrow we want to fire, instead of just trenching it away to just get some bonus damage through. And our blue arrows are pretty good. They're either good on hits that do bonus damage, or some valuable on hits, even though these probably aren't ones we're going to be hammerheading. Although we definitely could, since they just check for an arrow to be, or a cannon to be activated. So if there's a world where we're ever throwing 2 harpoons in a turn, we could activate this on the main one, the first one we throw, and then still fire the other one. And then we are on Enchanted Quiver, as if we're playing against a deck that does arcane damage, this card's probably just better than the Quiver that we're already playing. Then the rest of the inventory is just some cards we're going to bring into certain matchups. Barbed Barrage is a card that I think feels pretty good into Gravy. If you ever get put in a situation where he's locking you out with arrows, this card can help you clear the board. Same as Endless Arrow, it's just a repeatable arrow that can keep getting fired and then coming back. This is what comes in versus most of our matchups anyway, as it's very good with our Trench of Sunken Treasure, as it's a card we can immediately bottom next turn to regain a resource. But there are some times we don't bring it, which is okay. If you didn't want to play something Barbarage, if you don't find it to get the best results, you could play a different D-React instead, or you could play another pump, something like, I believe it's Fire the Big Guns is the load face-up pump in this set. I think that could be pretty powerful as well, and then you can mainboard that. We, of course, do have a D-React in the deck, because I think you still need some in this format. A lot of the good decks right now aren't decks you really want to be bringing too many D-Reacts into. Florian can disrupt D-Reacts in your arsenal. Verdance is still a lot of arcane damage. And something like Gravy, I don't think D-Reacts really offer the most value against, since a fair number of their allies are 3, and also they don't have very many hit effects. But there are times where we do need Sync Belows. There are decks still like, I don't know, Acilio has a lot of 0 for 4s. Syndra, some D-Reacts can be pretty powerful. Then you might want Shelter instead, but since we were already on Codex, and the deck can brick sometimes, I think Sync is better. If you don't want to play Barbarage, Shelter is a great card to play if you have the Shelters. The last 2 arrows in the deck are ones that I don't see very often in these Marlin decks, but I think they can be very powerful sometimes. Battering Bolt is another 2 for 6 arrow. Its really only downside is it's not a harpoon itself, so it can't gain overpower, but still, if we throw this thing for a 6 for 10, that's still really strong, as if they do take the hit, we still get to look at their hand fully, and if they have allies in their hand, say we bring this into Gravy, which is one of the matchups we will be bringing it into, we just do some extra damage to them and get rid of their hand, which can help them if they're setting up anything like a Golden Tipple or any of those other discard synergy cards, which is very nice. And then finally, Remorseless. This is just here for our more aggressive matchups. I don't know how much aggro is going to be in the format. Looking at the results from the US Nationals, there isn't really too much that Remorseless plays the best into. There wasn't too many Syndra, there wasn't too many Acilio, especially not in the top 8. There was 0. But I do think there are times where Remorseless does have some use. There will be these aggro decks around. We saw a fair number of Acilio, a decent number of Syndra trying to go against the Gravy. So having Remorseless in your deck for those matchups, I think, is good. Landing this arrow against either of those decks or any other deck that plays a lot of attacks in a turn, really any ninja, you can get a lot of value from the Remorseless. So I think it's a card that is very powerful and I want to be playing. For what we take out whenever we want to bring in more than one of these cards, I think Premeditate or Take Aim could be an option. If you're in a very late game matchup, something like Gravy Bones, I think Take Aim is a little worse than some of the other cards you'd be playing. If I was playing against Gravy, I would bring in the Endless Arrows, the Barbarages, and the Battering Bolts. So I would need to take out 2 cards. Take Aim is definitely one that you want to be removing. And then I think Premed does do some good things versus that Gravy matchup. But there are times where a Codex of Bloodrot just like traps an ally in their arsenal. So it does get some good value. And you're not going to cut a blue So the only other cards I would consider cutting are like Conquer the High Seas or blue or red Golden Tipples. And Golden Tipple can deal with another ally. Conqueror is just super good at threatening them. So I would cut Pre-Med in that situation as well. But again, if you weren't playing the Barbarages, you only need to cut one card. I would cut the Take Game instead. Just for the battering bolts in that situation. For our aggro matchups, we can just put in the Remorseless. If it's a matchup we need the Sink Below against, and with the Remorseless, think those 4 power breakpoint decks. We can opt to actually go down a blue. It's probably right to go down the Golden Tipples in those situations, since that's the only blue in the deck that does not block for 3. And we're adding in more block with these Sink Belows. And since we're putting Remorseless in our deck, it's not an arrow that has a really high cost like the Battering Bolt or the Barbarage. So we do need less blues for those situations where we have, our average hand. The cost of our deck on average goes down. Normally we are playing our Golden Tipples anyway, so the blue ones in the deck are only here for the sometimes we need to pitch it. Versus, I already talked about our normal matchups, Endless Arrow, our fast matchups, our slow matchups. I guess I didn't talk about our super slow matchups. There are really slow matchups. Think Guardian. You can easily just only add the Endless Arrows versus Guardian. You don't really need the Sink Belows. The Remorseless doesn't do much. These big arrows, you could argue the Barbarages if you think they're going to try to fatigue you. Just add them in. And similar against Gravy, they might just try to fatigue you, so you can just put in an extra card if you want and only cut the Take Games, since Pre-Med still lets you have some value against the Gravy. But that's really going to be it. There isn't much to say about this sideboard. I think the inventory for this deck is a lot simpler than how it might look, and I know I talked a bit to explain it, but once you play a few games, you can definitely feel it. Like I said, Barbarage might not be the answer. If this card doesn't end up being one of the better cards to play into Gravy, I think it's right to just sub it out for another defense reaction, or for another pump that we can just play in our deck if we need it. For something like our aggressive matchups, an extra reload could be really nice, so we could play that one instead. But this is what I have been liking. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate if you liked, comment if you have anything to say. I read all of my comments. And I want to thank you all for watching the video. Not sure what we're going to do next week, but we will be back next week for another deck list. I want to thank you all again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.